Hey, this is Dr. Chad Kish. Welcome back to EDU 417P and PEP 417, the co-offered course of Methods, Materials, and Observation of Teaching Elementary Physical Education and Coaching Youth Sports. We're in Module 6 today, and we're going to be talking about adaptations and assessments. So there'll be two chapters we dive into today. Hopefully you've read the chapters and you can glean some of the information and summarize it, scan it, and apply it to what we're doing as far as building our lesson plan. So we're in Chapter 7 out of the Dynamic Physical Education for Elementary School Children textbook, as well as I've pulled some information from Introduction to Teaching Physical Education Principles and Strategies from Jane Scheinman to help us apply information on adaptations and assessments into our learning. So we'll start out first with the adaptation section, which if you've taken PEP or PED 420, you'll have some background in adapting and modifying activities for people with special needs, disabilities, and or low performers. So what are our objectives for Module 6? First off, we are going to define and describe adaptations for physical education and activity. We will discuss how to modify PE activities. We'll explain and apply 5 things in order to modify PE and activity. We will discuss various ideas to modify sports and activities. We will apply an understanding of adaptations to the lesson plan. We will define and describe assessments for physical education and activity. And we will discuss the different types of assessments, both formative and summative. And then we will also apply an understanding of assessments by planning assessment strategies into the lesson plan. So there are our objectives for Module 6 that cover both adaptations and assessments. So let's start off with our information from Chapter 7 and background information on modification and adaptations in physical education. First of all, it's important to know what is a modification. A modification or adaptation of an activity or learning experience to make it as appropriate for a person with a disability as a person without a disability. So what we're trying to do is find a way to modify, adapt, change different things within an activity or learning experience for somebody with a disability to try to make it as appropriate or similar to their learning or activity as somebody that doesn't have that disability. So I'll give you a brief background because you may have already had the adaptive physical education class or exercise prescription for individuals with disability, the PEP or PED 420 class. So here's a background on adaptive physical education. As a professional educator, it's important for you to provide quality education for all students, regardless of their ability level, in what's called the LRE, or the least restrictive environment. The least restrictive environment has changed over time. Federal legislation and different ideas and concepts to protect students and individuals with disability have led to this concept. We might be talking about IDEA, the No Child Left Behind Act, the ADA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. So a lot of these things pull together adaptations for diverse learners or individuals with disabilities, whether it's in the classroom or in the recreation or community-based setting. So the least restrictive environment started off with students with disabilities being taught in a special education classroom, but that's not the least restrictive environment. The LRE means they're going to be placed in an environment that's as most similar or exactly as the rest of the students in the classroom. That led from moving students in a special education classroom to moving them into a regular classroom, so they're in the least restrictive environment, this normal environment with the rest of the students. and possibly having a paraprofessional or a special educator with them. You might have heard of the concept as class within a class. That's when multiple students with disabilities are in a regular classroom and have a secondary teacher or a paraprofessional. So we're going to try to always put the person in the least restrictive environment. When it comes to community-based recreation, if we are receiving federal or state funding, we're going to have to adapt our programming to provide those opportunities to individuals with disabilities. We can't just cut them from the program because they're not like the other students without disabilities or participants without disabilities. We have to find a way to provide them opportunities to participate. So that brings us to how do we do that? How do you modify PE activities? The first thing you're going to want to do is learn about the disability. You should consult the IEP, which is the Individualized Education Program. If a student has a documented disability in the school system, they'll have this plan. You should probably be a part of the planning process as a physical education teacher. So you'll want to read and look at the IEP. Then you're going to want to talk to some special education professionals. That might be the special education teacher, the special education coordinator, or possibly even discussing with the para and the parents and different things to learn about the disability for that specific student. Next, you're also going to want to understand specific characteristics of that student and their disability or diverse learning style. Just because there are certain characteristics that students with Down syndrome might commonly have, that doesn't mean this particular student with Down syndrome has all of those characteristics. So it's important to learn the overarching characteristics of different disabilities, especially the students you're going to work with. But you need to learn about each student's individual personality, abilities, disabilities, challenges, and diverse learning styles to try to work with parents, previous educators, and special educators to determine what's the best way to educate or modify activities for the student. As the student gets older outside of elementary physical education, you might involve them in some discussions about this. Hey, what works for you? Talk to me about your personality. All right. Next, it's important to develop a variety of teaching strategies to move students from the idea of not being able to perform, having challenges, having a disability, to a student that can perform, can do different things, and has special abilities. So it's important to take these strategies and move these students on a continuum just like you do the rest of the students in learning. So how do we do that? We concentrate on improving performance. All right. How do we concentrate on improving performance? First of all, do that research. Do the research on the disability. Read the IEP. Are there any specific plans within the IEP to concentrate on improving performance? If not, that's an important part of developing future IEPs. All right. And then next, make sure we take our modifications and put them or document them on our lesson plan. Why is it important for that? Number one, if it's on the lesson plan, it shows some planning. It allows us to think about it, make sure that we are prepared. And then the next thing is it could be required legal documentation showing that you plan for this that is required in the IEP process for the student. So make sure it is documented on the lesson plan, and you also include that in your assessment and take assessment data on these students, because those things are going to be involved in this IEP process, which you'll learn more about in the 420 class or SE 221 if you're a educator. Here are 5 things to modify. So when you're building your lesson plan, these are some of the things you should use to help students with disabilities, or you might also think of this as struggling learners. What I like to think of is all students have abilities, everybody has a diverse learning style, everybody comes in with a different baseline or level of performance. So all I'm trying to do is ensure that all students have an opportunity to improve, and I might need to modify or adapt things for struggling learners, just like I would with a student with a disability, to bring them on the continuum of learning to try to get to close as a competent performer as possible. So here are the 5 things to modify. Number 1 is space. Do we want to modify space? What does that mean? Do we lower a basket? We might do this with a early performer in elementary. We might use an 8-foot goal in basketball. All right. We might lower the net in volleyball. We might change the size of a goal. A soccer goal might be bigger, so it's easier to score a goal. All right. We might modify the field. We do this a lot just naturally. We make the field smaller because sometimes the field's so big that the participants have to be in great shape to even perform. And in elementary PE, we want to condense that field a lot of times. We might have a smaller, even basketball court than the normal size. Soccer, more than likely, we're going to play on a smaller field. Flag football, we'll play on a smaller field. We may also modify space by having restricted zones. What does this mean? This means only the student with the red penny on is allowed in the lane for basketball, or is allowed in the goal area for soccer, or is allowed inside the 3-point arc when we play team handball. Have restricted zones to allow learning, struggling performers to perform without a defense or a cluster or beehive of people around them. That allows them for more spatial awareness and to be able to slow down and concentrate on the form of performance. The next thing we can modify is the task. All right. How do we modify the task? We might change the rules to allow things such as more bounces. All right. You might get extra steps before we call it travel. You might, if you're in a wheelchair, be able to carry the ball instead of kick it like a soccer ball or dribble it like a basketball. We can modify the task of specific skills within our activity. Number 3 is equipment. How can we change the equipment? You might want to make the equipment larger, smaller. You might use lighter equipment if the equipment's too heavy. You might use some specialized equipment that you had to fabricate yourself. You might have to attach some equipment to a student's wheelchair. So consider all these different things you might do to modify your equipment. You might make it change the visual acuity of it. You might use a brighter colored ball or penny or cone. You might use, if you have a student that is visually impaired, you might use one that makes a noise, some kind of specialized equipment. Number 4 on the things to modify is the people. Can you change teams up? All right. What would this be? You might make the person with a disability an extra performer and play 6-on-5. All right. You might just change teams up to have the star performer there, and the star performer can't score 2 times in a row. So all the lower level performers with less level of ability get opportunities to play. When I taught physical education, when we got into the games unit, people couldn't score twice in a row. All right. So that made them learn how to get other skills, such as being a facilitator, and allowed other people opportunities to score. You might modify this to have smaller games. That would be less people. That could also go with, modifying the field, but you could have smaller sided games. If you think of when you're learning basketball, you don't always start 5-on-5 with people or full court with space. You might play a game of 2-on-2 or 2-on-1 or 3-on-3. Also modifying the people might be adding in that paraprofessional or that class within a class teacher. So that would be having the assistance of somebody. The paraprofessional might even be a buddy if you're thinking about the Special Olympics system, a more advanced performer or older performer that's serving as a tutor during the game. And then number 5 is safety. Remember, safety is important for everybody and for everything, including the field, the equipment, and even considering rules. All right, if somebody doesn't have great spatial awareness, we're going to have to be pretty careful with those hockey sticks. If we have students that have a lower level of motor skill, motor functioning, where they might actually hit somebody with the hockey stick because they're not don't have as refined motor skills. We might add things such as layers of double older tube socks on the bottom of a hockey stick and tape it on to make it softer. All right, but remember, safety is important for all. We don't want to have a ball possibly get under somebody's motorized wheelchair and have them flip over. So consider safety when designing all your activities and with all your equipment. So to review, when you're working on your lesson plan, consider modifying one of these three things: space, the task, which could be the rules or some kind of way to modify the specific skill, the equipment, the people, and how people are aligned, as well as safety. So consider those 5 things when you're developing your lesson plan. All right. So here are some specific ideas how to modify sports. If you think about playing baseball or softball or even kickball, you could decrease the pitching distance to accommodate the needs of the student, whether they're pitching the ball or throwing it, or attempting to hit the baseball or softball. When a student tracks visually, the further away, the harder it is to get your swing pattern to match up. The shorter the pitching distance, the easier it is for a student to match their swing pattern to the throw pattern. A lot of times, as the teacher, I would be the pitcher in some of these games when we first started playing, and I would try to throw into a student's swing pattern to allow them to be successful to hit. You might allow extra time between bases. How would you do this? If we're playing a game of softball, you might make 2 people touch the ball before it goes to first. So if the hit's to shortstop, the shortstop would have to throw it to somebody else, and that somebody else would then throw it to first base. So that could allow extra time. We could put this in so the students can all do this, and we would say every hit you have to attempt to turn a double play. So you have to throw to second base before you can throw to first base, or you have to throw to the pitcher and the pitcher has to throw to first base. All right. You might allow the use of a guide to push or hit a ball. So what would that be? Say bowling. You've seen the bowling ramps where you can set the ramp up, you can try to aim it, you can roll the bowling ball down it. A guide might also be a thing such as a tee. Do we allow people to hit off of a batting tee? All right. Once again, going back to our last slide, a smaller area of play for games. You might play basketball in a half court and a 3-on-3. You might play indoor soccer where you're in the gym, or you may have a smaller soccer field. So consider doing that, especially in the learning phase and for sure for elementary physical education. And then as well as with struggling learners to take out some of just the space in the game. Think about children in wheelchairs. Allow them to possibly hold the ball in their lap during periods of movement so they don't have to dribble. And as they become more competent performers, add in the dribbling. Think about nets. Anytime you have nets, whether it's tennis, volleyball, pickleball, badminton, you could lower the net to accommodate somebody in a wheelchair or with limited motor skills, or you might even play chair volleyball where everybody has to sit in a chair, or scooter sports where all students have to move around in a scooter to allow some area to level out the playing field for the student in the wheelchair. Consider your sports equipment. Remember, use larger and softer balls if necessary. You might use a beach ball when you first start out doing volleyball, and you may use one of these softer training volleyballs because your regulation volleyball may actually sting a little bit to beginning performers. You might use lighter weight rackets or clubs, or even the lighter weight wiffle ball bats or the bigger wiffle ball bats to allow to hit. Right? Think of the Velcro baseballs and catching mitts. I think most of us have played the recreation game where you have the thing that looks like a frisbee, but you strap it to your hand and it's made out of Velcro, kind of a round circular thing, and you'll throw the ball back and forth and the ball actually sticks to the Velcro. You might start out by teaching that instead of a catching mitt to learn the actual catch part of the throw and catch. And then always consider ideas when you're changing your game, like beach ball volleyball or one bounce volleyball. where you play with the beach ball because it stays up a lot longer. There's like the spiking isn't, or the hits aren't going to come down to the ground very quick. Allow one bounce in volleyball or possibly two bounces in tennis before you return, before it's a point, to allow people more opportunities to return. So here's our assignment for this chapter, and this should help us out really understanding how to modify things. So our assignment is 5 things to modify. So what you're going to do, you will explain and apply your knowledge and understanding of the 5 things to modify in PE and activity. We just discussed this a couple slides ago in the lecture. So you're going to start by listing the 5 things to modify in PE. So those are the 5 categories. You're going to list the 5 categories in this lecture, and you're going to number them 1 through 5. Then under 1 through 5, you're going to put an A and a B. So under each number, you're going to provide 2 examples of specific ideas to modify each category. So if category 1, I'll go back to the slide, show you again, is space, under space, you're going to have an A and B, and you're going to give me examples of how to modify space. In soccer, we will modify space by reducing the distance between the goals and making the field smaller. Then I need you to do another completely different one. So don't do soccer and don't do just changing the size of the field. You might say under B, we're going to modify space in basketball by allowing a specific student with a red penny to be in the lane, and we will provide struggling performers an opportunity to be the only students in red jerseys. All right? So those would be A and B. So you're going to start by listing the 5 things, 1 through 5, and then under each one you're going to give an A and a B, and they need to be different examples. The examples need to be from different activities, and they need to be completely different examples. Try to be creative and distinctly different. All right? And you're going to post this to Canvas by the assignment deadline, which is shown in the assignment and on your announcements for the chapter. So here's basically the format. You're going to put number 1, a category of things to modify, A, the first example, B, the second example. And then you'll go down number 2, the second category of things to modify. First example, second example. So you'll go up to number 5. Once again, go back and look at the video to see these 5 things to modify. All right? So you'll post that to Canvas. So let's wrap up the adaptation portion of this lecture before we move on to the assessment portion. How do we take these things to modify, or these adaptations, and put them in the lesson plan? First of all, go to your lesson plan, pull out your lesson plan instructions, read through that because it's going to give you some more detail. But what you're going to do is you're going to take the information we just used and you're going to apply it to your specific sport, skill, movement pattern, topic you're teaching. And you're going to, under that, you're going to make one adaptation for somebody that is a special needs student. So somebody that might be in a wheelchair or with Down syndrome, or possibly missing a limb, somebody with a visual or hearing disability. So you're going to develop one adaptation or modification for your specific activity and how you would teach that to an individual with a disability. So tell me the disability and then explain what your adaptation would be to help them perform your activity just like students that did not have their disability. Then under your second modification, you're going to choose an adaptation or modification for a diverse learner. So you can pick, tell me, is it a struggling learner or an advanced learner? And then how are you going to make an adaptation or modification to assist the struggling learner in moving themselves through the learning spectrum and improving? Or how are you going to make it the appropriate level of challenge for an advanced learner? So you're going to detail these 2 adaptations or modifications on your lesson plan. You won't specifically teach them in your lesson. You may end up using them a little bit due to having some diverse learners or performers, but there's not necessarily a section when you teach that you have to address it. All right? So make sure, once again, on your lesson plan, you're going to list a modification for an individual with a disability, and you're going to list a modification for a diverse learner. Any questions with that? If so, make sure you shoot me an email as soon as you get done with this video, and I'll try to help walk you through that process. But you should be able to go back to your assignment, 5 things to modify, and the section of this lecture, 5 things to modify, to be able to apply your learning into your specific lesson plan. Next, let's switch gears, and this is still Module 6, but we're going to look into Chapter 8, Assessments and Technology in Physical Education. But we're going to focus on the assessments part. We will look at technology later in this class. So we're going to look at Chapter 8, the assessments portion of the chapter, how to have and develop assessments in physical education. So let's start out by understanding what is an assessment. We have a course here, PEP 320, which is Assessments in Physical Education, where we teach you a variety of performance-based assessments. If you haven't had that class yet, this is going to be a preview, and if you have had the class, this is going to be a brief review of what an assessment is. An assessment is the measurement or collection of information regarding a student's performance of skills, knowledge, and or attitudes that is taught in class. All right? In an assessment, we need to have some kind of documentation as well. And documentation comes in the form of a score sheet, a checklist, a rubric. Those are some forms of documentation to provide assessment data. So let's start by telling us a little bit about assessments. What should assessments tell us? Assessments actually do a couple of things. The information a teacher or coach receives from a on-the-spot assessment or a graded type assessment, we'll go into those 2 different things a little bit later, is what does this student value, understand, and what are they actually able to do? All right? What are they, like when we do an assessment, we're trying to determine what the student knows, how they think, and what they can do. All right, so assessment should answer a couple of these questions. What does the student already know? What are they able to do, or what can they perform? In PE and coaching, a lot of times we're going to focus in on this performance. What are they able to do? What can they perform? Can they do a skill? And when we understand what they know and what their level is of performance, we know what kind of feedback to give and what they need to do or learn next. So if we start with a soccer unit and we ask, does anybody know how to do soccer? Have anybody played soccer before? That's a brief diagnostic test. Students will raise their hand. Then you might start asking them, okay, what skills do you need in soccer? Well, somebody will probably say dribbling, somebody will say scoring, somebody will say passing. If that's all you get to, you know your baseline level of performance is pretty low. They haven't learned about or can talk about goalkeeping or offensive and defensive skill, slide tackling or stealing the ball, trapping a pass or controlling a pass, right? So then you might just do a brief modified game to see where their skill level is. And that would be an observational baseline assessment. And by watching that and observing that performance, you'll know what your group of students need to do next, and you can then design the future learning opportunities in your soccer lesson or unit. So let's understand, because you're going to have to detail these different types of assessment on your lesson plan, it's important to understand the difference between formative and summative assessments. Summative, I always say, use the context clue of summary. When's the summary of a paper? It's near the end, all right? But let's start with formative. Formative assessment is not necessarily formal. Don't think of that. Formative assessment is where you assess students' progress within a lesson or unit. You might do this by observing, just watching and providing them then context clues, coaching pointers, corrective type of feedback. So you might just be watching. You might do an interview technique where you're asking questions. You might ask a student to perform something and then ask another student to point out the parts. All right. So what it does is it measures performance and or knowledge at a certain point in time. You know right then, it's on the spot. Right? We talk about this as on the spot assessment. It's really where you're observing and it's where the teaching goes on. Formative assessment provides you with the observational data as a teacher or coach to provide the corrective feedback, and then you use it to determine what to do next with that individual as well as the whole group. Do we move on to our next drill? Right? Does this person need a little bit more work on dribbling? Do I need to provide them another opportunity to practice? All right, so your formative assessment sometimes is just so seamless within the instruction that it's really considered observation, feedback, and teaching. All right, summative assessment is a little bit different. It's used to test learning at the end of a lesson or unit. All right, it's your end goal. If you think of when we developed our performance objective, we'll look at our tasks. Students will dribble a soccer ball. The condition, around a set of cones. All right, that could even be your formative assessment. But as soon as we add that last comma and we add the criteria, down and back within 30 seconds or less without losing the ball, that gives us our end goal. And our end goal is usually going to have some kind of documentation, a score sheet, a rubric, whatever the thing, and it could be used as part of the grade if we're using that skill test as part of the unit grade. So the formative assessment is during the lesson, and the summative assessment is an end goal. It might be the end of the unit, or it could even be the end of a lesson or a segment of learning. All right? Formative assessment can be documented. It not necessarily is always documented because it's on the spot and you're going with the flow. Summative assessment should be documented. What are some examples of formative assessments? All right. Students need to be assessed frequently to provide feedback and provide chances for skill corrections. So remember, this is the corrective feedback, the use of teaching cues, the use of coaching, the coaching and teaching process. It should lead to skill and development improvement. So the examples would be possibly a observational assessment tool where either peers assess, they might have a partner watch them and tell them if they're holding their follow-through. You might do a self-assessment. This could be asking the student how they feel or to look at a specific spot when they hold their follow-through, or possibly provide them with a video to watch themselves perform. Or the most common one, teacher assessments. That's where you as the teacher or coach watch what's going on and provide feedback. So all three of these observational assessment techniques can be used to provide feedback so students can continue to develop and improve their skills. Video assessments and written assessments are also helpful tools to help students improve their skills. If you ask a student about the 4 parts of the basketball free throw, if you have them write them out and explain something about each part in the stance, they're going to write stance number 1. What is the stance? Where you stand with your feet shoulder width apart. You're going to get in a bend your knees to get in a general athletic stance or a semi-squat. You're going to face your target. You're going to have your shoulders aligned with your hips. All right, and you're going to have your butt down a little bit, sitting and your head up looking at your target. If they can explain what the stance is, they're more than likely going to be able to do it or to be able to provide that self-assessment if they think they did that. So video assessments and written assessments, even on what a skill should look like or feel like, can be helpful tools to help students improve their skills. You might use other examples, exit tickets, right? An exit ticket could be you have 1 or 2 or 3 questions that a student answers at the end of a class, and then you go back through and use that assessment data to see what students do and don't understand to design your next learning experience. All right, that could be like an end of class mini quiz. All right. A journal assignment, students write about it, how they felt about something. You should really just grade this on if they did it and if they got to the meat of it, not exactly how they feel, because you may have differing opinions. It could be doing something, instead of journaling, it might just be keeping a log. What was their activity patterns outside of class? It could be an interviewing technique, and this isn't them going to interview somebody. This is you as the teacher doing a question and answer session with some open-ended questions, or asking students to show you the specific part of a skill throughout a lesson, or possibly at the end of a lesson that you're not doing a more formal summative assessment. So let's dig a little bit deeper into summative assessments. It is a strategy, remember, that tests skills or knowledge as a summary or at the end of learning to see if students have met their performance objective. Remember, when you're writing your lesson plan, this is really what your performance objective says it is. It should provide specific data on your performance objective. So go back to your performance objective assignment and make that be your summative assessment on your lesson plan. Remember, you provided a task, condition, and the criteria. Well, the criteria should be the appropriate goal for an elementary age student, all right, or the student you're actually teaching. This could be some kind of skills test or a competition. If we use our example of the student will dribble a soccer ball between cones and be able to go down and back without losing the ball within 30 seconds, that would be a skills test. All right. You might have some kind of competition. In your free throws, you may look at results. We will shoot 10 free throws every day during our basketball unit, and we will keep the results and turn that into a competition. All right. We could use a rubric to look at a variety of skills, or a checklist to score people on gameplay or modified gameplay. If we're using volleyball for an example, if we've taught the serve, the bump, a volley, whether that's a spike or a dink over the net, all right, we could watch gameplay and see if each student could do each of those skills successfully with good form 2 to 3 times, and we could keep that rubric or score sheet over a series of days and use that at the end of the unit to see if they've been able to use the overall skills. Maybe the first day of gameplay they didn't perform, but later on they were able to improve and perform. That's what we're looking at. You could have somebody do a research assignment, find the background of something, write a paper, make some kind of product to research an area, maybe analyze a video. All right, you might teach in elementary PE if you're working on creative movements and dance. You might teach all of your students 4, 5, 6 dance steps, and then have them develop a dance using some of the steps you taught or other creative steps that includes an 8 counts dance step, and have them develop that, maybe individual or in a small group, and then perform that for the class for their demonstration, and then try to teach the rest of the class to do it. All right, that actually teaching and presenting something helps you understand it at a deeper or higher level of knowledge than even just doing it. You might do a flyer development activity. I love doing this activity in class when we did team sports. At the end of a unit, I would say, all right, now you are the head tennis coach. You're going to make a camp flyer, and on most camp flyers, those flyers say what skills we're going to work on. They're going to have a sample daily activity schedule. So if they're able to do that and list all the different skills and plan out a well-sequenced practice activity on their camp flyer for that sport, they understand how everything ties together. So those are good examples of some summative assessments. All right. For yours, on your lesson plan, make sure it ties directly to your performance objective, and it will probably be some kind of skills test or teacher observation on performing a skill. So how do we write the lesson plan considering assessments? First of all, you need to plan at least 2 assessment strategies. Right? Look at the lesson plan template as well as the lesson plan instruction sheet provided to you, and develop one formative and one summative assessment strategy. Your formative is going to be what's going on during teaching. How are you going to ensure students are learning what you're doing? This probably could be an observation, a interviewing technique, asking somebody to show you form, all right? And then one summative assessment strategy that needs to be directly tied to your performance objective. So whatever your performance objective says you're going to do, that could almost be identical to what your summative assessment strategy is, and you need to try to do this if time allows for it in your lesson. Remember, your assessment strategies should provide you, the teacher or coach, with the information to determine if your students or participants are actually learning the skill and how you'll continue on the learning progression from your closed skill environment to open skill environment, from your sequence of activities if you're ready to move on or if you need to do some reteaching. So how are you going to actually assess when you teach? First of all, list both of these on your lesson plan. You will do your formative. That's where you provide your corrective actions. You should do your summative at the end, all right? And if we run out of time, you'll explain we would close the lesson by doing this. All right, so list those on your lesson plan. Remember, observation can be a technique, but you can't use the same technique here and here. The other important thing is you need to develop some kind of score sheet. How are you going to score if people met your summative assessment? You might not actually get to it, and I don't expect you to use it in your teaching, all right? But if you were going to teach and be an expert level teacher, you would need to use that score sheet. So develop a score sheet with your lesson. You'll turn that in the day you teach with your lesson plan and your 2 diagrams, all right? But you should create this and submit it, and it should actually be aligned a little bit with your summative assessment. What are you going to score, right? If you're using a gameplay rubric, put that it's a gameplay rubric, it's volleyball. I'm going to look if each student is able to have 2 serves with correct form, 2 bumps with correct form, 2 volleys with correct form. Do they understand teamwork and strategy over here? So you'll be able to make that as a checklist, all right? That would be a point scoring checklist form. All right, if you've had the assessment class, the expectation level is a little bit higher on if your score sheet is going to be a checklist, a rubric, a gameplay rubric, a holistic rubric, whatever the case. That would be a review from 320 for you. All right, so that is how you take the information from Chapter 8, Assessments and Technology, and use the assessment portion in developing your lesson plan. So here are the Module 6 assignments. You have the Module 6 Reading and Review quiz that covers this module. There are 10 questions, all right, multiple choice, true, false. 5 of the questions are on adaptation and 5 are on assessments, all right? Make sure you do the assignment based on the first chapter here, 5 things to modify. Follow that assignment guideline. And then work on your individual teaching lesson planning process. So between now and when you teach, by half of you it'll be next, or most of you it'll be next lesson, next time we meet in class. Fully develop your lesson plan. Your lesson plan has to have 2 diagrams / formations or maps, and 1 score sheet to assess your summative scoring point for your performance objective. You're going to turn this in, all right? You might not have your score sheet or your diagrams when you turn it in on Canvas, all right? But you're going to make a copy for me to turn in while you're teaching, because I want to follow it while you're teaching. You will turn it in to me at the beginning of class that day, and then you should have a separate copy for you or a note card to teach from. But I need your printed out lesson plan the day you're assigned to teach, as well as you will turn in the template filled out minus your maps and diagrams and score sheet on Canvas. Prepare yourself to teach. All right? Practice, practice, practice. Make sure you have all the equipment. Make sure you understand how you're going to distribute equipment. And practice, practice, practice some more. Go through your lesson plan. Talk through it just like you were teaching it to somebody. Practice with your dog, with your neighbor, your roommate, your friend, your brother, your sister, if you can. And then if you haven't already, get working on those observation hours. You should have a few of them done by now. You should be working through your observation worksheets and planning the rest of your semester. All right, just a quick reminder, preparing yourself to successfully teach a lesson. We went over this last time in class. This can be a review, or you can end your video now, but I would suggest you watch the next 5 minutes or so to talk about preparing to successfully teach your lesson in this class. All right, what is the key to successful teaching? Planning and preparation. If the lesson plan, I teach you how to do that very detailed. If you then use the lesson plan to prepare and practice a couple times, you know the keys to successful teaching and you should perform well. So here are your lesson plan tips. You'll turn in your completed lesson plan with 2 diagrams and your score sheet, but you should use a small card, note card, or one sheet that you keep in your pocket as a summary to teach from. This might be your performance objective written out exactly. It might then be your detailed sequence of activities, and it might be a couple of your points of corrective actions or your closure statement. If you have a whiteboard in the gym, or you have one, or you have a device you could bring in, you could even detail objectives and possibly an outline of task or a video on your device or whiteboard. All right. Reflect on each lesson. All right. After you teach it, make notes to make notes for future use. You will complete a reflection worksheet and post on Canvas 24 hours after your teaching, but if you're actually teaching or coaching, what you'll want to do is you'll want to make some notes on your lesson plan, so the next time you come back to teach this lesson, if it's later in the day, if you have the same class twice, or if it's later a different semester, you'll remember what you wanted to improve on. Always save your lesson plans. They may have to be submitted as part of the evaluation process. I always just put them in a 3-ring binder when I was teaching, and I'd go from front to back. You may need them for documentation for an IEP or during an IEP meeting or evaluation meeting, and they can be some kind of legal defense. Say somebody gets hurt in your class, they might interview the students. Oh, I don't remember if the teacher told us to make sure we stood in the on-deck circle and kept our head up when the person in front of us was at bat. But if you have it on your lesson plan and you actually have your diagram with it drawn out, you have a better chance of providing successful legal defense, especially on safety guidelines. And then, not necessarily for this lesson, but if you're going to teach or be a coach, consider things such as rainy days or your loss of your gym or field, or it's too muddy outside. So have a rainy day, loss of gym, and several substitute teacher lesson plans developed and placed in some kind of binder or available to you for a snap if things happen. You never know when they come in and say, oh, picture day makeups is today. You don't have your gym the last part of the day. All right, that happens quite a bit. So here is a review of your lesson plan forms. All these forms are listed on Canvas. The lesson planning worksheet, you're going to turn in and detail that. Did you look at your feedback on it? This is not your lesson plan. This is just a tool in developing your lesson plan. So after you created that, turned it in on Canvas, I provided you feedback and assessment. Take that feedback and use it to improve what you're going to do on your lesson plan. The lesson planning worksheet is about a quarter or a third of the lesson plan. So you'll take all this information, you'll open your lesson plan template, you'll put this information in the selected area, and then you're going to add some more because the lesson plan is more detailed and the lesson planning worksheets just to see if you're on the right track. So use your lesson plan template along with the lesson plan worksheet and the lesson plan instruction sheet to develop your full lesson plan. All the instructions and examples are on that lesson plan instruction sheet. You're going to fully complete this, use the instructions, use your lesson planning worksheet and feedback as a reference, and you will submit me a copy at the beginning of the day you teach. You won't teach from this. I'm going to be using it. So if you need it, print out 2 copies. And then you'll also submit to Canvas. Don't forget, the lesson plan includes 2 maps, formations, diagrams, something of that course. There needs to be 2 of those, and 1 score sheet based on your summative assessment. And then after you teach your lesson, within 24 hours, you'll need to download the lesson reflection worksheet from Canvas, use that as a template, complete it, save the document, and then submit it back to Canvas within 24 hours of when you teach. I'd like it to be the same day you teach. So that teaches you how to go through the reflection process to improve. Once again, teaching in class, be here, be ready. There's no makeup days. There's no days in the schedule to allow you to make up. Too many times people just don't want to be prepared, so they'll come up with an excuse. There might be reasons that you don't come that day, but there's no excuses to allow you to make this assignment up. Be prepared. Practice, practice, and practice some more. All right? Be confident. If you practice, just be confident in your material. The more you're confident, the more your participants respond to you. Speak loudly, clearly, and to everyone. Don't just pick one person to talk to. Remember, you're in a gym and there's going to be a lot of activity going on. Be as clear as possible. Try not to use jargon. And then speak to everyone. Make sure during your lesson you walk around and provide feedback to every single person. Be early. You might want to check with me before class, but you have to do the setup. If you're teaching volleyball and you're going to use a volleyball net, you're going to have to get the volleyball net out of the closet and you're going to have to set it up. So you have to be early. I'll be here early the days we're teaching, and the closet will be unlocked. So come in, get your equipment ready, and do the setup. You are the teacher or coach. Nobody prepares that for you except you when you're in the real world. Check your equipment. Make sure we have it. Make sure it's prepared. The balls are aired up. You can find it. You have it in a box, whatever the case. If we don't have it, make sure you can provide it, or else do not teach that lesson. Have a lesson plan for me, and then some kind of card or pared down lesson plan document for you to use. All right? Make sure you read your essential questions and your performance objective, so those things need to be on the card for you. And then remember, complete your reflection and submit it within 24 hours of teaching. When you participate in PE class, make sure you're on time, you're fully participate to earn credit for the day. Don't be difficult with your students. Come dressed appropriately for a PE class. Wear some tennis shoes, no boots, no flip-flops, no sandals. The shoes need to be clean and tied up. And have some appropriate clothing. No skirts, or don't wear anything that's too restrictive to restrict your movement. You must pay close attention to the presenter and attempt the skills they're teaching you to the best of your ability. Try to perform for them and try to make it easier on the person teaching. And then you must adhere to appropriate classroom behavior. Once we get started, no cell phones. If you're the presenter, don't use your cell phone as a timer. I'll help you with the countdown. No electronic devices, including headphones. The only electronic devices permitted would be if you're going to use them to show a video to your class. Be safe and adhere to all safety protocols. Don't overcompete or be combative or anything like that. Respect the equipment. Make sure you take care of the equipment. Get it out. Put it up where it goes. Try not to break anything. Respect the presenter. Pay close attention to them. Ask questions when need be. Please do everything you can to make it easier on the presenter, because this might be the first time they're ever teaching a lesson. And then respect other participants. Safety, good teamwork, sportsmanship, play within the rules of the game. Try not to cheat the system. I'll detail your reflective journal here, as well as it'll be in the next module. So in section 3 of your portfolio, bring several sheets of paper, and then you're required to provide the name of each lesson and the person presenting, and then provide detailed reflective feedback for each lesson every day. You're going to write down at least 2 things, positive, things you liked, things you noted that you could use in the future, and 2 things you saw from a critical lens. These would be possible negatives or areas that could be improved. you can use those to plan for your own improvement. When you watch other people do something, and if they have something that could be improved, you possibly could too. So complete these daily immediate reflections and put them in section 3 of your portfolio. You must be here to earn credit for the reflection, and there also is going to be an area where you complete these reflections and submit them to Canvas on our online days in the next module. So last thing, here's your to-do list. Reminder again, lesson planning worksheet, read the feedback, make corrections, use that to help you with the lesson plan. Look at your lesson planning worksheet and your feedback, take the instruction sheet for the lesson plan, use the lesson plan template, and then prepare that lesson plan following the instructions and using the feedback from your planning worksheet. The lesson planning worksheet is not the lesson plan. Make sure you prepare 2 either diagrams, maps, or formation sheets. Prepare a score sheet to be used with your summative assessment, and double check to make sure you have equipment. To be successful in teaching, keep calm, write a lesson plan, practice, 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 be prepared and confident, and then I will provide you with a teaching schedule that's in Module 7 so you know which day you're going to teach, and there are no makeups. Be prepared, be ready to go. Air up the balls, set up the nets, practice, 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 be confident. All right, any questions? Make sure you shoot me an immediate email and be very specific in what you need help with. But make sure you use that lesson plan template and you print out the lesson plan instruction sheet to use, because it's going to provide you with the critical information you need to be successful in developing your lesson plan. Have a great day. If you need anything else, get in touch with me via email. We'll set up a Zoom meeting if we need to. And until next time, practice, 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 be confident, and go change the world.